So nice. We did it twice. Tom Jones, the former longtime columnist of the Tampa Bay Times, my radio partner back in the day, and now I guess he has his notes column for the Poynter Institute of Media Studies, as well as a podcast. Yes, he has his own podcast. He's going to join me again today, back to back and better than ever. We got Tom Jones on the big program today, and we're going to talk a lot of NFL football, some stuff about the quarterback derby that we got going on in free agency, as well as coaches and what makes a winning program, and some of the ones we've been around, both in the National Football League and the NHL, which Tom covered for years. So we'll get into all of that in just a minute with Tom Jones. And before that, I want to remind you guys to get on down to International Plaza and Breitling Boutique. We've talked about these guys. They're great sponsors of ours. And the reason I want you to go there is they handle customer service about as good as anyone. Okay, Breitling Boutique is in sort of the center of the mall, upstairs. And the Breitling Company, of course, makes the best Swiss watches in the world, really. They've been in business now for like 144 years. They've been in International Plaza, the Breitling Boutique has, for about 5+ years. And you talk about great watches, the Chronomats, the Navitimers. They've been doing this thing now since before Christmas, where they've been celebrating the NFL's 104th year anniversary. There's 32 teams, right, in the NFL, and they have 32 team watches. It's a limited edition. I could not specifically tell you how many are left for each team, but certainly we have a lot of NFL fans out there, including Bucs fans. These are gorgeous watches. They have the the team colors as the face of this beautiful Chronomat watch, as well as the logo. And when you see them, you're going to fall in love and want one, absolutely. So not just men's watches. They have women's watches too, sports watches for your wife, for your girlfriend. If your wife is on the go like mine is, a little hard on watches sometimes. These things are very durable, but absolutely stunningly beautiful. All kinds of different colored wristbands for them. Make sure you get on down to Breitling Boutique. Take your time, have a drink in their beautiful store. Talk to the customer service. You're going to love it. They're used to dealing with athletes, and you're probably going to see a Buccaneer or two in there if you stay long enough. It's Breitling Boutique, International Plaza Mall, and make sure you let them know that you heard about it on Sports Day Tampa Bay. All right, back and better than ever, back to back and better than ever. Rick Stroud now with Tom Jones joins me. Tommy, it's twice.
So
as nice
hey
to
man,
have you, bro.
I saw you on X a week or two ago, and somebody stole our show. Somebody stole our radio show.
They did, like. And it was
you texted me about it.
Yes, it actually was Dan Lebitard, the Dan Lebitard show. Which we know Dan, obviously.
And I like, Dan's great.
Good guy, Miami Herald writer. And of course, he had all those shows on ESPN. Now he does his own thing. I guess on, was it YouTube or one of those channels? I don't know. Anyway, yeah. So this is funny because years ago, when you and I were doing the morning show, and we kind of stumbled on it. Actually, you brought it up about, and it might have started with a conversation we had about Frank Howard, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, the most demeaning thing you can say to someone, and we would get callers all the time, and I have
other words, refer to them by a name, like almost in a dismissive way, like
in a dismissive way.
Thanks, Chief.
Condescending way, almost. And you reserve it though for special moments, right? Like you can't just throw that out for anybody because you forgot their name.
Correct.
Although I do that a lot, but no, it has to be. And so I've carried this over. This is more than a decade ago. Me and you did this, and you brought it up, and I thought it was brilliant. Where you go, the way to really get some guy is to not call him by his name, but just throw one out there, like, okay, sport, or ace.
Thanks, champ.
Champ, that was a big one. The champ one, dismissive. Very condescending, but also if you call a guy a champ, how can you get mad, right? Like,
right? It's very passive aggressive. It's subtly insulting. You just don't come out and say,
right,
hey, and then use a bad word.
That's right.
But usually like chief is one that for whatever reason, chief is like the go-to. That's like the original one. Okay, chief.
Chief
Like,
was
if
the
you
number one most. They did the top 5, and they voted that Chief was the number one condescending. You know, sort of what pronoun, I guess.
right. Yeah. No, and I can see like that's a go-to for everybody. Like,
Yeah.
okay, Chief, easy,
It's
Chief.
hard to. I mean, listen, Chief. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to say anything prior to Chief without it being condescending, unless you're talking to somebody of American native descent or something. But yeah, that one I
It's
like.
no, it's perfect. It's a perfect word. It's because you're letting them they really can't even get mad at it, but that they're supposed to get mad at it. Like, and that's what's great about it. That they know that it's a bad, it's an insult. Everybody knows what's going
I
on.
always thought for me, like I always
Uh,
thought ace was good because if you say
Ace is a good
someone's
one,
an ace, they're a know-it-all, right? Like,
right?
listen, ace, like you
Our
think
buddy Rodney Page said whenever his dad called him Ace,
he was in trouble.
he was in trouble, and that was the end. He had enough. Look, Ace, I said, get in there. That was the best one. One of the best ones I ever heard, because I had this conversation. Like, once you and I did this on the radio, and look, we're sort of making
We're
fun
not
of
claiming it, but yeah, we did do it.
yeah. I mean, and we're saying, oh, Dan Lebtard ripped off our show, but
I think we
because I'm
invented
sure
it.
people
Yes.
did that show before we did.
I invented the internet too. Go ahead.
But it was, I was having a conversation with Jeff Schultz. You remember Jeff Schultz, who was
Yeah.
the columnist in Atlanta, and then he worked for the Athletic, and I think he's retired now.
Yeah.
But he called he said one of his favorites was calling somebody pumpkin, which I thought was, thanks,
now
pumpkin.
That's tough because if you call a man pumpkin,
Yeah,
right, then that's
it's insulting.
it's a feminine. I think it's kind of a soft term, if you will. Like if you call somebody pumpkin,
right?
it's like you're not tough. You're not. Hey, listen, pumpkin. So to call a man,
So I like that. Do you have a favorite? Did you ever come up with a favorite?
I mean, I probably keep back. I mean, I don't disagree with Chief being the one that's probably the one you hold back for real intense purposes. I'm fond of Ace.
Ace
Like if I get mad at you, I'm probably going to use Ace.
I see that you've used it on X. I'm pretty sure.
And I'll say yes. I picked this up from our show, and since then, if somebody gets at me, and they come at me often, if I want to come back at them, I'm very well known now for using those type of pronouns, and I reserve them. There are different degrees, right? Like if you can disagree with me, but if you're disagreeable, I'm going to fire back occasionally, and I probably shouldn't because it's a waste of my time, but I do it. But I usually, and then once in a while you'll try a new one that doesn't really resonate, like Spud, like, hey, Spud, like that's a small potato, right? Like you're kind of putting them down that way. But yeah, Chief is always a go-to. Ace.
You know what? Here's another one.
Bud.
That's
call
actually
a guy Bud or Buddy.
Bud. Yeah. Well, Bud almost seems like pal.
Buddy
like pal
is
and
pal.
Bud.
Yeah, that's Jackie Gleason, right?
Here's the other one. Here's taking it to the next level. And I used to know guys growing up, older guys who would call you by an actual person's name. So if somebody was trying to tell you, you know what the Bucs need to do? The Bucs should trade for Micah Parsons and do this, and then you come back with okay, Jason Light, come back with like a name, like you're not really calling him Jason Light, or you're not really calling him,
the sarcastic.
Eric
you think
Nylander,
you're this guy, yeah.
You think you're like. So I used to know guys like that growing up who they would say, hey Frank Sinatra, take it easy, like it was meant to be. Or like if you said if you had like a bad joke, and they would use like an old time comedian, okay, Shecky Green or whatever. This shows how old we are.
Yeah,
but and that's what you would do today. Like if somebody was trying to act funny, you come back and with okay, Bill Burr, take it easy.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Chris Rock. So that's taking it to the next level. Calling them by a specific name.
Who is the funny man that you'll watch if he's on? Is it Bill Burr? He's pretty
I
good.
like Bill Burr. I like I can't say his last name. Nate, what's his name? Nate Bargatze or whatever. Like
Yeah,
that guy's
close
pretty
enough.
good. John Mulaney. I like
John
Mulaney.
Mulaney's
Pretty
good.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are probably my go-to guys.
Well, I'll have to steal some of their material because I'm. That's the other thing. Like as we kind of process what what Twitter was and now X has become, I've gotten away from firing back. Like I've just decided that I can roar when I want to, but I'm kind of an older lion now, and it doesn't. I think people just want to argue. You know what I mean? Like there's no. It can be and you deal with this probably more than I do at times with the Pointer Institute of Media Studies
I
because you
don't know.
write.
I don't know. Sports is a whole other animal, man.
Sports is bad. Yeah, it can be bad. Um, I
There were
listen.
times where I used to go on Twitter when I was a sports columnist where I'd be bored for half a day. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, you know what? Today's the day. Today's the day that I'm going to get into it with. If people want to like really get into it about a column that I wrote, and I wouldn't like purposefully like be insulting or say something. I never said or wrote anything that I didn't absolutely 100% believe. But I also, there were some days where, even though it was probably not the best idea, but I'd be like, all right, today will work. Today I got nothing going on.
But
I'm willing to have this debate.
if you wrote something that you knew wasn't going to be well received, let's say by the masses,
Right.
like you knew when you sat down and you wrote, like, okay, I'm gonna tick a lot of people off with this, right?
Right.
And maybe it's just a fan base, but maybe it's just people in general, right? Just
Well,
based on
I
your
can give you
viewpoint.
specific examples, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'd like to hear them. Like,
Like I knew whenever I wrote the name Colin Kaepernick, then it was an all day
yeah,
thing.
that was a
Like
loaded
because
topic.
I wrote obviously in support of Colin Kaepernick's right to protest. Well, I did. I remember we were at the game when Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson both knelt
Yeah,
for a game, and I wrote supporting their right to do so.
yep,
So I knew that. Whenever I wrote about Jameis was a hot button issue, you know, especially when I wrote that I thought the Bucs should cut ties with him because of off the field stuff. I knew that would be very polarizing. And then there was like name changes of teams, like the Washington football team, when I called for their names to be changed, or
right.
you know, those I knew that all day that was going to be an all day emails coming in.
Did you
What
ever
do
get to
you
the
get?
point?
Like, what have you got in the last couple of years? Because I know,
Oh well,
would it go back to the COVID thing with Antonio Brown?
that was probably the worst one. I mean, just because it lingered for a couple weeks where there was no action at all. I had written this story that he and a couple other players had gotten fake COVID IDs, and I even said at the time when I was doing this story, like I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong. It was just the rule, right? Like we know now
Right.
more about COVID than we did back then. I mean, they made us. I covered a whole 2020 season with Tom Brady winning a Super Bowl, and literally never stood in front of the man. Did every Zoom call, had a mask on. I got tested for 7 days a week just to go to the facility. We had to wear locators so that we weren't more than six. So we were definitely more than 6 feet apart. And if you got within 6 feet of somebody else, it would beep and let somebody else know that you had contact with them. Like it was, the early science on that was not very solid, right?
But you also didn't die from COVID too.
But I
So
didn't die from COVID, and in fact, I didn't really catch it till much later. But at that time, the NFL had a rule, and the rule
it
was
was the rule. It was the rule.
you had, yeah, you had to, you know, get a vaccine, and if you didn't get a vaccine, there were certain areas you couldn't go to and be with certain people. And so, at any rate, that whole fake vax card thing, and yes, it was fake, but it wasn't just the fans who you know they couldn't see straight about something like that, but it was also at the time, it's not a secret, there were a lot of people in the organization that were upset about that, and that's fine. I don't expect them to agree with everything I write, but at least I give them an opportunity to respond. But I think because between the time I wrote it, nothing happened to the player, right? Like you write this story that says they did this, and you have these sources and people don't believe in the sources and they say, oh, this person has an axe to ground, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's no action taken. And then one day, 2 weeks later, the NFL got around to doing a little investigating of their own and they suspended him and 2 other players. Right. And then there was probably maybe more pushback because now you're hurting the team, right? Like, oh, look at what you've done. And, how stupid is this? And of course, we all saw what eventually happened with Antonio Brown, right? I mean,
Sure.
He lost his mind and
Just had a meltdown. Yeah.
stripped himself down in New York, and that was the end of him. And so, but yeah, that was probably that episode, which lasted a while because it was over several weeks, was probably one of the worst. But the difference between me and you is I wrote news stories, and some people didn't like the subject matter or whatever resulted in them, if it was Jameis's suspension or whatever. You wrote columns though, and that's a little different because you're really putting yourself out there, and you were able to say this player should be benched or this coach should be fired. Did you ever fire a coach in a
You know what?
column?
I never did, and that's the thing. Like, people used to talk about how negative I was, and I never actually called for that
For
for the head of
somebody's
anybody.
job. Yeah.
I said a couple of times I would understand if they did, and
Here's a reason
like,
why they might think
right
about
when
it. Yeah.
like when the Bucs let go of Dirk Cutter, I'm like, yeah, I get it, I understand,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand why.
Yeah.
I kind of pushed back to like when I think when Guy Boucher got fired as the Lightning, I thought, yeah, I'm not sure about this. But I've never. I think the strongest I ever got when it came to about somebody not doing their job well, as far as an executive or a coach or whatever. So I was pretty hard on Steve Eiserman after the Marty St. Louis thing. I said,
That
"Look,
was
I think he needs to pick. Do you want to be the GM of the Lightning, or do you want to be the GM of Team Canada?"
That was strong, and you had
but
Marty's
not that.
back in that
And
one.
Eiserman was great about it. But but the thing is and that's the other thing you have a hard time convincing people. And yeah, and this happens, I'm sure, when you talk on the pod or when we used to talk on the radio, is that I never, and I don't think you ever, I know you never have, never said anything just to get a reaction. Would never, I'm going to write this because people will freak out if I write this. Everything I wrote, I absolutely 100% believe.
I usually go the other way. I try to be, I'm not, I don't have any pom-poms or anything, but I try to be careful before I write something that I know is very serious or that's going to get a reaction, that's going to cause a player to be looked upon a certain way or a coach, right? Even if it's just a news story, like I take that very seriously, and I think you did too.
Well, you know what the funny thing was? So, this is one of the. I think we've told this story before, but one of the biggest arguments I ever got in, it started at the beginning of a season when Dirk Cutter, like, basically verbally accosted me on the way to the press conference
preseason,
and he was yelling at me about, because how was that? Is that offense good enough for you? Because they actually had a good game. The funny thing was, you wrote what he was mad about. If you remember that, right?
I wrote what he was mad about.
We had a story, and you had a story talking about how their offense needed to show a little bit
right.
more.
It wasn't even you that had written
in the preseason
negative. Right. I had written that they just hadn't scored a lot of points with their
scored a lot of points and
with
they
their number one offense, which
really
had not
vanilla.
played very well. Right.
Right. And they looked very vanilla as an offense. So they have a preseason game where the first team offense comes out, plays lights out.
Yeah.
We're on our way walking from the locker room. They're like, all right, Coach Cutter's on his way to the locker room.
Yeah.
So we all start sprinting.
Yeah.
I somehow get next to Cutter, and Cutter looks at me and he's like, is that good enough for you? How's that for an offense? And I'm like, what? And you looked at me, he's like, what did he just say to you? I go, I don't know, you talked about, is that good enough? And then we all realized, like, you wrote that. Stroud wrote that.
Story.
I didn't write that.
I wasn't going to jump in there and say, hey, that was me. I wanted him to like me, but at the time.
He already disliked me.
He disliked you immensely. As I recall, he had a name for you that day, and I can't recall what it was. Or he said you were so bleeping negative or something like that. No, didn't he go a step further and say there would be physical harm involved or something?
He's like, I'm going to either win you over. He goes, I'm going to win you over.
Oh, that was it. Or choke you out.
Yeah. Either I'm going to win you over or I'll choke you out.
Yeah.
He was kidding. I'm pretty sure.
I know. He won you over, as he did most of the Bucs fans.
I
Um,
always liked Dirk. That's the
I
funny thing.
never,
He
Dirk had an edge to him, and he didn't as an assistant coach. As a head coach, he had a real edge to him. But he was one of the guys that would absolutely tell you what he believed, and would tell you off the record if you needed it, or on the record if he didn't care. Like,
right.
and he paid attention. You know what I mean? Like he read everything, but he also, you know, I mean, look, these guys, this is their whole dream, right? This is their whole life in front of them, and everything they do is scrutinized. And let's be honest, like back then, Jameis Winston in his second year, was he any good? No. Like it was difficult, right? There was a lot of things that weren't great with that football team back then. But you understand what kind of a pressure cooker it is. But he was actually at the end, like he paid attention, right? He knew if people were trying to get it right. And at the end of the day, like that's all you try to do in this business, is like give people an opportunity to to say their piece, ask them the questions you think the fans want to know about, and get out of the way. You know what I mean? Just kind of get out of the way. Now in your job,
And
you got to call
no, and
balls and strikes sometimes, but I
yeah,
don't.
no, and I understand that, which is why I found it very hard to ever call for somebody's job. Like
Yeah,
that's to me, that's a
yeah.
you really have to, you know. Now the only time I did was Jameis when I basically said that the Bucks should be rid of him, and it had nothing to do with his play. Although that's eventually what did
That
run him
got him
off was his
anyway. Yeah,
play. But
which brought us Tom
but
Brady, which was great.
what's that?
I said, which brought them Tom Brady after they
Which brought them
decided to
Tom
move
Brady,
on, move on from Jameis Winston when he.
which was like 5 years ago this week. I want to say right
That's
that
right.
that
It
he
was
came on
five
board.
years ago this week. One of the most surreal days in my life and in Buccaneer history, that a guy like Tom Brady was actually going to leave New England and come to, of all places, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like, just crazy. And then for 3 years, it was nonstop, and it was Haley's Comet, and it burned bright, and it was over.
Let
Um,
me ask you this though, Rick. It's over, but you've been there since. They've continued to make the playoffs since he's gone.
Remarkable to me
How
that they've done that.
how much does Brady get credit for that?
Mhm.
Did he change the culture, or was he
I
was he just there when lightning struck?
No, I
Like how
think
you
he was responsible for changing a lot of it. I think from a talent standpoint, they had a lot of weapons, and they were ready to win. The guy that doesn't get enough credit, and probably never will because he wasn't here very long, is the guy that won the Super Bowl. It was Bruce Arians.
mm,
Bruce Arians, golf cart or not, uh, didn't suffer any fools. Like he was very blunt, in a very good way. It was, players had a tough time adjusting to that. Certainly Tom did, but he had expectations. And during that COVID year, with all that was going on, and guys having to not go out and take care of their teammates, like he was the COVID police as much as anybody. But Bruce had already started to build that culture. They were a player away, and it just turned out to be Tom Brady. But I think they were ready to win. But when Tom came, it was a different level of accountability, right? Because now you had to be accountable. No one wanted to let Tom down. The players knew two things: they had a chance to win a Super Bowl because their quarterback was named Tom Brady, and they better listen to him because he's been to 10 of these, or 9 of these at the time, and he won 6, right? And so automatically he had them at hello. You had me at hello. And so I can remember going out to Berkeley Prep and, peering over the wall at him with his first, workouts. They weren't able to go to training camp or any of that mini camp. And he had the guys out there at 6 a.m. because he didn't want to be in the heat of the day. And there wasn't anybody around but us. And he had his helmet on, practicing with a helmet, walking guys through how he wanted them to stem routes, where they had to be, the specific, point on the field that they needed to be at a specific time. Like, he was precise from the minute he got there, and demanding. And I think that, you know, in one year, which is remarkable, they were 7-5, but they won 8 in a row. In one year, they win a Super Bowl. For the guys that were left on that team, and there's very few now, but for the guys that won a Super Bowl and went through that, they passed it down. They changed their habits, how they took care of their body, how to win games, how to finish games, how to score points. And all of that sort of did, I think the culture of that did carry over. But I think a lot of it was Bruce, and a lot of it was players that are still here today, whether it's Mike Evans or Chris Godwin or Levante David, which is remarkable. Those three guys are still playing, quite frankly, and playing at a decent enough level that the club continues to bring them back. But I think it's for as much as their play now. And, obviously Mike has been consistent throughout his career, but it's for much as their play as it is for what they represent and how the impact they can have on the younger players. Guys that come in and say, look at this guy. He's in his 14th season. Look at how he works. Look at how he takes care of his body. Look at the notes he takes. That is as important as anything when you're coming from college football trying to learn how to play,
When
and
you were there, when the Bucks, when Dungy came
yeah.
and that whole group, and they had been awful since the McKay, Doug Williams
Mhm.
NFC Championship days. And all the years of losing seasons, and Lehman Bennett and Richard Williamson and all that, Ray Perkins.
Right.
Who was there? Was there another player there, or was it a Dungy thing, or was there a player on that team?
I think it
Those
began
teams.
before Tony got here. Although Tony had the era of Tony Dungy until through John Gruden was what we refer to as Camelot. I mean, it was really because they had 12 losing seasons in a row. I want to say double-digit losing seasons and all that. And Tony, this first year was 1-8 before they started winning, and I think they won 5 games. Their 6 games that year. Um, but remember, in '95, White's last year, they drafted Sapp and they drafted Derek Brooks in the same draft. Immense talents. And John Lynch was on that team, but John wasn't really starting. He was really contemplating going back, and he'd been drafted by the Marlins and playing baseball. I mean, he did not understand. He was out of. They were playing it at a kind of a linebacker position for a while and all that stuff. So Tony came in and put the pieces in the right place. But the guy that I think changed them was Hardy Nickerson.
Mm,
You remember Hardy Nickerson played for the
sure,
Steelers,
sure.
and he was probably their first legit free agent when free agency wasn't Plan B free agency, but actually restricted free agency. And he came and signed with the Bucs, which was a shock because they were terrible, right? And he left the Steelers. He definitely took the money, but nonetheless, he was scary. Like he shook those guys, and he had such an impression, I think, on Derek Brooks and others that uh, practices were now going to be tough. Right? They were going to compete. He was going to crack helmets, and I mean that literally. He got in fights in OT and things like joint practices with the Dolphins. He got kicked out of his own practices. Right? Hardy was one of those just badasses, right? Like you can't you can't make up a guy like that. You either are or you aren't. And he could play. He could flat out play. He made a billion tackles. And and I think he started to hold the defensive side, and couldn't do anything with the offense. He started to hold the defensive side accountable, though. And then when Tony got here, now you had another voice, and Tony had his own way about, and he just put guys in the right position, and stuck with the plan, didn't deviate, wasn't reactionary. This that quiet confidence, that if we keep doing these things the right way, eventually it's going to turn, and it did. But yeah, that I think Hardy Nickerson is the guy that will never get a lot of credit. And the irony is that he came in as a free agent, and when they got really good, he was part of those teams that went to the championship game and that sort of thing. But he left to go to Jacksonville. He took the money again and went to Jacksonville the year that they then went on to win a Super Bowl.
Mm.
So he wasn't part of the Super Bowl team. Him and
I'm
him and
I'm
Warwick Dunn.
constantly fascinated by team culture, locker room culture,
Oh, it's real.
organizational culture.
It's real. And you
I'm
covered
fascinated by
world
it.
championship teams with the Lightning. They had something. I think all championship teams have something from a bond standpoint, from a culture standpoint. And I will say this, look, it's talent, right? Like it's the players, not the plays. Tom Moore taught me
Right.
that, and I believe that. And that was Chuck Noll's thing, right? Like you got players, you got to teach them and put them in positions, and the team that plays the longest, the hardest is going to win, and all that. And I believe that. But I also think that with every championship team, and you covered the Lightning when they won, I think there is I think there's a special bond. I can't
Hmm.
I put my finger on what that thing is, but even with the Bucs when they won in with Tom Brady's year and the '02 team, there's just something about, and I see it. The weird thing is I see it with this Buccaneers team. I do. These guys love playing football, and they love each other and playing. There's not, if there's a faction that hates this guy or really doesn't like that, I don't know who they are. I'm sure it exists, but I'm telling you, um, and maybe it's the Mike Evans of the world who's not a diva as a receiver, and Chris Godwin who's left pieces of himself all over the NFL and come back. Maybe it's just the examples that Brady set, but they are as much about winning and not worrying about the other stuff as any. And I think Baker Mayfield, who went through a lot, right, as a player with all the different teams that he played for, in the spotlight you get as the number one overall pick and a Heisman Trophy winner, he's just a dude, right? Like he's just a guy that gets along with everybody that wants to drink beers, and it's intentional, like it's not accidental. Like he forces himself on the defense too and the defensive players. But the way he plays, not the most talented guy in the world, but there's something about this Buccaneers team that I think if they were to improve their defense just a little bit, this team averaged 29.5 points a game. Now they got a new offensive coordinator and every year is different. I get it. But I think they have that chemistry that could take them a long way. I really do. It's just
That
whether or
the
not they have enough players, right? Enough
Yeah, no,
playmakers.
I mean, obviously, you're right. At the end of the day, it comes down to talent, and I've
It
covered a
does.
lot of teams across different sports where, look, there's 53 guys that you cover on this team at any one time.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, not all 53 guys like all the other
No,
53
no.
guys.
Hmm.
And I've covered Lightning teams where this guy wasn't a big fan of that guy, whatever. But you hit on it for the most part. It's wanting to win for one another, or at least recognizing that even a guy you don't like, maybe, or a guy that maybe you disagree with politically, or a guy I mean, we look across the NFL, particularly the NFL, where, I mean, you have guys that come from the country, guys that come from the city, from north, from south, east, and west. It's all so different, and yet, if they see another guy's working hard, that's all they care about. Like if
Yeah.
that guy's going to go out and work as hard as he can,
Yep.
then I'm going to go out and work as hard as I can. But I noticed that with those Lightning teams, while there were moments that all those guys at some point hated John Tortorella, at the end of the day, they knew that when it got into a critical situation, John Tortorella had worked as hard as he could to get them in the best position to win, and then they start playing for one another.
And
And that's where I think,
he had their back too. Like shut your
yeah,
yap and the whole thing. Like
oh yeah, he absolutely that whole thing, that whole shut your yap. The whole point of that, because I asked the question that elicited that answer and had nothing to do, the shut your app had nothing to do with what I asked. But the whole thing was he was doing two things. One, he was telling the other coach, you don't, which is it's a really a golden rule. You don't talk to the other players.
It was
Like if
Hitchcock,
you're
right?
not,
Is that who it
yeah,
was?
if you're not, like that's the whole Warren. Remember Warren Sapp got into it with Mike Sherman, the coach of
Yeah. Put a jersey on.
put a jersey on. That's the thing. Like, because when you start mouthing off, what's Warren Sapp going to do? Punch a
A
60-year-old coach? Like,
Yeah.
that's not. But the other thing that Tortorella did that day, for the whole 24 hours, all people talked about was, did you hear what Tortorella said? They didn't talk about, the Lightning got their ass kicked last game, right? Like that.
That's right. He took
Nobody
the
was
heat off
talking
of the
about that.
players, right?
Right, right.
And you think that was
So,
intentional on his part?
oh yeah, it was the first question of the press conference. I asked something like, usually with Torch, you had to give him a softball. You had
Get things
Eric
going,
Owens and I
right?
used to
Yeah.
joke about this, and Damian Crisadero. Like the first question of Tortorella had to be it was a burner question, we called it. Like, ask something that,
Who's
because
got the layup?
he was gonna dump on it no matter what you asked. You could ask the greatest hockey question ever, and he was gonna give you a Belichick answer, just like nothing. And then then he would lighten up a little bit after that, or ease up a little bit.
You get answers.
So it literally was a thing like, how was practice today, Torts, or something like totally generic.
And he just
And he's like,
launched into it.
and next thing you know, he was talking about shut your yap. But going back to this chemistry thing and working hard, and that thing with like Baker, you could see it with Baker. Like, he's a baller, and you got to think, guys,
Well, they
when your
respect
best
that.
players and your most important players are ballers,
Yeah.
then I think that's when you go back to Brady too. When you look at a guy who's won 6 Super Bowls, he's been to a million of them, and he's getting here before I do, and he's working harder than I am, and he's leaving after I leave, and
Mm-hmm.
he's eating vegetables when I'm grabbing slices of pizza. Like that's that's what changes the game right there.
And Tom had it. Tom had an interesting way about him because he was so much older than everybody. But he really he found a way. It's like Wirfs has said. He goes like, we couldn't go out with beers with Tom, right? Like, where were we going to go, right? That we could have a beer with Tom. And those guys could have been his sons. Legit could have been his sons. Like, I think one time Wirf said, "How old are you, Tom?" And he told him, he goes, "You're as old as my mom." That's like, geez. And but even having said that, like Brady was very uh personable. Like, I've said this, like he was one of the most, and it was surprising to me. But for a superstar, right? For a celebrity quarterback. He wasn't just a quarterback, but a celebrity quarterback. The guy was so present when you talked to him. Never had a cell phone. Wasn't in a hurry. And I've been told the stories in the early years. He was gold, right? He'd sit there even after he started winning Super Bowls at his locker and cut it up with writers and things like that. He wasn't able to do that later, but I think we think all of us had one interview, and it was me, right? The 3 years that I was here, I had a one-on-one with him. But even having said that, like, he integrated very well with that locker room. Like, there wasn't anybody in there that he wouldn't speak to. He'd come up to players that just came off the waiver wire, and you think you're in a big time somebody, and he'd come up and say, "Hi, I'm Tom Brady." And they're like, "No shit," you know. It's like, but that's just kind of the way he was, and so from that standpoint, I think you know there's a surprise because you're kind of got one eye open. You're like, well, this guy's famous and he's got all these Super Bowl rings and Giselle Bundchen and all this stuff. Like, what is he about? And then they find out he's just a guy. Like, he really is interested in winning games, and he was demanding, though. He was demanding. But he had so much knowledge that you just wanted to soak it up, and you didn't want to be the guy that let him down. And I think that was the thing. They knew Tom didn't have a lot of years left in him, but they wanted to get what they had, and they felt like we have a chance. That's still going to go down, Tom. And you covered the Lightning. I thought the Lightning's first Stanley Cup was one of the greatest achievements I've ever watched. Like, those guys, Marty and Vinny and all those guys, like, that team got the crap beat out of them. They looked like they had been through a war by the time they got done with that Stanley Cup, and the winning in Edmonton in Game 6 with Marty's goal and all that,
Calgary,
like,
yeah.
or Calgary, I'm sorry, was unbelievable. But also, both the championship teams, I think that the Bucs had a lot of unique individuals, but they were all about one thing. They were all about winning. Like, you did at some point, guys will check their egos at the door, and those are the teams that win, right? Those are the teams that say, I'm just going to do my job, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to win. I'm going to trust the guy next to me that he's going to lay it out there for me. And it's special when you see it, when you're up close like that. You know what it looks like. It's hard to describe. I thought the Rays had a couple teams like that too. They just didn't make it, but I thought they've had a couple teams that were very close like that.
That's the thing. Like, when you put winning above all else, then you realize, like, it's your legacy. I think that's the thing to Tom Brady, and I don't know him at all,
Right.
but it seemed like he realized very early in his career that this is all, everything's about legacy. Everything, and Jordan was like this, I think, where
Right.
it's, if you win, that's scoreboard. You
Right.
got scoreboard. Now, at the end of the day, I remember hearing there was a famous story where the Edmonton Oilers were going for the Stanley Cup. They had these young, Gretzky and Mark Messier and Paul Coffey, and they were all a bunch of young kids, and they were playing the New York Islanders, and the Islanders were going for their fourth cup in a row,
Jeez.
and the Islanders won against these upstart kids, these veterans, and the Oilers were walking out of the building, and they expected, like, oh, we're going to dread going by the locker room because guys are going to be like, shooting champagne and screaming and
Hmm.
yelling. They walked by, and they could see into the locker room, and guys were laying with ice packs on their head and on their knees, and guys were quiet and just sipping beers or whatever. And they realized, like, it's not about the celebration. It's about the journey. It's about the work
Mm.
that it took. And they said, that's what it takes to win a championship right there. And then, of course, the Islanders, the Oilers came back and won, 4 of the next 5 or whatever. But
Yeah.
that's what it's about being a baller. It's about, it's interesting. It's cool to hear you say that only obviously one team can win the Super Bowl, but and you're not saying the Bucs are going to win the Super Bowl, but they have the qualities that some championship teams have in terms of that chemistry.
Yeah,
And
they got the chemistry for sure. And the quarterback. And I think that, the other thing I think is, Tom, that when you get in the postseason, you need early success. Obviously, you can't go home early. But I think if you win a game, and you probably witnessed this too, like there's been some tough first series, but it just feels like if you get over the hump, right, and you get a little bit of momentum, a little bit of belief going, that you can go a long way. Everybody is 0-0 in the postseason, but like I felt like if the Bucs had found a way to beat Washington a year ago, they may have had a great chance of getting to the NFC Championship game. You know,
oh yeah,
um, and I thought they were right there with Detroit the year prior to that, and so it's because they beat Philadelphia in the first wild card. So I think that if you can just get a little confidence in the postseason and kind of take a breath and play your game and all that stuff. I mean, the game they lose to Washington, they had multiple chances to win. The defense couldn't get off the field, but then the offense, they called a play. Liam Cohen called a play that I'll never understand. It was a jet sweep. They've got the ball, they've got the lead, and they just got a first down and came out of their own territory with a first down pass to Mike Evans, and they call a jet sweep to Jalen McMillan. It was only the fourth time he had run the ball all season, and meanwhile, Bucky Irving had been creasing the Washington in the second half, and they messed up the timing. I think Baker messed up the timing of the play. It resulted in a fumble, ended up in a touchdown. Bucs went down, kicked a field goal to tie it. They screwed up their goal to go situation, or they take the lead there. And if you just get out of that game and they lose 23-20 in overtime, I think I think they're fine. I think they go on and probably play better and exhale and everything's so you got to have a good start. You need a little bit of breaks. You need luck, but you got to create your own luck too. You can't turn the ball over and stuff like that. But no, I think this team has a little something special to them. We'll see. I mean, they got some older players. Football's different because it's about injuries, right? It's about injuries. I mean, how many of those Steelers teams probably should have won more, Super Bowls, or how many of the Bucs teams, like after 02, they should have won more than
oh
one
yeah.
Super Bowl. They
Well,
got
and you look back actually, like at the like this is going way back in the '70s when the Steelers did win 4 Super Bowls. Like they were healthy throughout all of it, and the years they didn't win, yeah, they were banged up. Basically,
yeah,
there was the one year where both of their running backs got hurt for the AFC
that's
Championship
right.
game. But
That's right.
those other, you look at teams that win championships,
You
yeah,
got to have
they're
luck.
they're healthy. Yeah,
Yeah, you got to have luck with injuries and that sort of thing. I'll get you out on this. So I mentioned Pittsburgh, and as we do this podcast, they don't have a quarterback yet.
we're recording this on Monday night.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it might run later in the week because we're getting ready to go on vacation and whatnot. But that said, this whole quarterback thing is fascinating to me. So the Steelers haven't had a quarterback that they could really count on. They've been the Steelers, and Mike Tomlin is Mike Tomlin. He's going to not have a losing season and all of that. Great. But if they got the quarterback right when they had him right, and they had a guy like Roethlisberger, they had a chance every year to win the division, win the Super Bowl. Now they've gone through a myriad of quarterbacks. Okay, so this time you you know you could get Russ Wilson back possibly. He's visited the Giants. I got a feeling that it's Aaron Rodgers waiting, and again, he may have signed by the time you hear this. But Aaron Rodgers waiting on Minnesota because Minnesota is the best deal. It's the best situation, right? They got a
sure.
young quarterback. If they go to him, fine. If they want a veteran to take that team with that talent, they won like 13, 14 games a year ago. Look what it did for Sam Darnold. If I'm Rodgers, I want to go to Minnesota. I'm all in on
Sure.
Minnesota. If I can't go there, then you got the Steelers or the Jets. I'm taking the Steelers because I know at least they got a winning product. I don't trust the Jets because I just came from a
The
team, or the
Giants, yeah.
Giants. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I don't trust the Giants because I just came from a Jets team that fired the coach and the GM wasn't very good and so on. So I don't want that
right.
situation again.
And better receivers probably
And
with
better
Pittsburgh.
receivers. Now Russ Wilson
Although
has
Giants
visited
got
the Giants. Who the hell if would Rodgers work? Pittsburgh as well as anybody. Would he work in Pittsburgh? Could he? They're going to win games, but could he take them further? Just because, and now they have a receiver in what DK Metcalf. I mean,
And they got Pickens and Freiermuth, is a good tight end. Look, I don't know at the end of the day that this team's any different significantly than whether Rodgers the quarterback or Wilson comes back or Justin Fields would have been there, or any different than like Big Ben's last 2 or 3 years, which he was not much. He was basically a statue back there at that point. They were the only team in the league that would complete 3 passes in a row, and it would
And
be
not have
third
a
and
first
six.
down.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was ridiculous. But the problem with the Steelers is, and Rick, you know this, you covered Mike Tomlin and Dungy is a part of the organization for a long time. That they have no identity. I don't know what their identity is. Like they used to be smash it down your
Run the
throat, run
football,
the
play
football,
defense, right?
play defense, win games 17-10. And now their offensive line's horrible. They can't run the ball. They're one of the worst running teams in the league over the last 5 years. Their quarterback situation's not been good. Um, would If you're asking me like what's the best option at quarterback of what's out there, what's left,
Of who's left.
and again, as we say this, Wilson's unsigned,
Yeah.
Rodgers is unsigned. I would have tried to. I think they played themselves here. Rick, is what happened. I think they thought, you know what? We'll kick the tires on some here and there, and if worst comes to worst, we'll just re-sign Justin Fields. And I don't think they expected Justin Fields to walk.
Yeah,
and he did, and I don't blame him.
I don't either.
Quite frankly,
if I'm Justin Fields, you had your chance. I was 4-2. You decided to play Russell Wilson, and you never let me come back and play again.
When that team was obviously couldn't do anything offensively the last 6 weeks of this regular season, and then did nothing in the playoffs. But I mean, could Rodgers work? Again, I think the Steelers are going to continue being the same team that they've been for the last 5 years, which is, Mike Tomlin, never losing record. They'll go 9-8, and they'll get embarrassed in the first round of the playoffs. That's who they are.
Yeah.
I just don't see any of that changing. And again, you talk about culture, and look, I know there's a lot to like about Mike Tomlin, but I also think the Steelers. It's an interesting situation. Is it good enough? You and I have this discussion all the time about my guy James Franklin at Penn State, and
worst big game coach in America.
He's 1-15 against whatever top 20, top 5 teams or whatever. But
Penn State's okay with winning 10 a year.
They go 10-2 every year, and they go to a New Year's Day bowl game. And this year they were in the playoff and lost in the semifinals on a last-second field goal. You might have one of those years.
They won't get rid of them. Why?
Because they like going 10-2 every year. Because you're afraid of. Rick and you and I talked about this back in the day. And I know, that Jim Leavitt left USF, and I know there was more to it than just went on the field. There was something happening.
There were circumstances with a player.
Yeah, difference besides. But having said that, I do think there was a faction out there of USF people / fans, whatever, who weren't 8-3 wasn't good enough. 8-4 wasn't good enough. They thought they should be, the number 2 team in the nation, legitimately,
Mm-hmm.
And then careful what you wish for. So I get that and that's the way I feel about Franklin. And yet I don't necessarily feel that way about Mike Tomlin.
Well, that's the thing. Well, why wouldn't you feel the same way? Although let's be honest, the Steelers have a pretty good track record of picking head coaches. So you got to believe they'd pick the next one.
They've had 3 basically since
50 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and going 9-8 every year is fine, and being competitive and being in a race and being relevant. But let's face it, like they're not. They've won.
That's a quarterback thing, isn't it? I mean, every team that wins a Super Bowl has that dude at quarterback.
They're just good enough not to get a good quarterback. You know what I mean?
But that's what they got to focus on. You either have one or you don't, right? You got Russ Wilson, and he's in the sunset of his career. He can't do anything. I mean, really,
he played way better than I could have.
Numbers look okay
last year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Russ is a you can't win with him. I just don't know that you can. Look, do you have a Josh Allen? Do you have a Lamar?
I mean, there's 10 guys, right?
There's 10. Patrick Mahomes. Do you have? Yeah, there's maybe 6, 7.
And that's where you look at the Bucs situation, Rick. It's remarkable that they sort of fell into Baker Mayfield, because there would have been a moment there where you looked at Baker and go, no different than you might look at once upon a time at Kirk Cousins, or you might look at Carson Wentz. Like he easily could have gone that way too.
Oh, yeah.
And he didn't. He turned out, and now Baker Mayfield, And I guess we should have known better. Like the one season where he was injured in Cleveland and shouldn't have played
Right.
and played anyway, I think sort of
I
threw his
think the
career
thing
off
people
track.
miss about Mayfield is where what he was made of going back to his high school days or going back to his college days, right? Walk on it at Texas Tech, be freshman of the year, had no scholarship, right? Could have gone to FAU, could have gone to Washington State, whatever. Decided to stay home, did that. Walked out in Oklahoma, didn't know anybody. Eventually becomes the starter, wins the Heisman. Like when dudes do that sort of stuff, you're not the fastest, biggest, most recruited. Like you got something special about you, right? And a little bit of swag. And I think when you're number one pick and you go to a Browns team that was 1-32 before you got there, or 1-31 before you got there, 1-31, and then you have he's had now I think 8 or 9 offensive coordinators in that many in the same number of years. Like you know, you want to kill a quarterback, that's how you do it. And you're right. He got him to the playoffs the third year. They beat Pittsburgh.
They went to Pittsburgh without their coach because the coach had COVID.
That's right.
And won in Pittsburgh.
And won in Pittsburgh. That doesn't
easily,
happen.
like scored like 50 points or a ton. I don't know how many points they scored.
They scored a lot, but that doesn't happen unless you have a really good quarterback and a really special quarterback. Because just a few years earlier, again, 1-31. So you're going to the worst team. You got all the and then the commercials. And I think people became jealous of that and how what serious he was about football or whatever. But Baker's Baker, and he went through some stuff, and 4 teams in 18 months, came out the other end.
Anybody could have had him.
Anybody.
Steelers could have had him.
Anybody. He'd have been great with the Steelers.
He would have been.
That's the kind of guy, right? That wears his emotions on the sleeve. That'll blood and guts run for the first down, whatever. Like that's a Pittsburgh kind of guy, right? To me, like
Sure.
they would have embraced him, and he would have been great there. A lot of teams missed on him. A lot of teams. And I'll tell you another thing. Had Brady not come back his last year, instead of Baker being in Carolina, he would have been in Tampa. He would have been here. But Brady did come back, and so they got him a year later. And, yeah, everything kind of works out, and now he's kind of a home here, and he's built a home, or he has a home on Davis Island, and the guys are all going to the Anchor Bar and hanging out, and everybody's friends, and they got babies and wives, and, he's really at peace with where he's at in his life, and he can absolutely still play. So that's what I mean. I think they've managed to thread a needle from the overspending of Brady and all that, and gotten to a place. And to me, all the Steelers need is a dude. They just need that guy at quarterback.
Well, and that's it. And they're not they overdrafted Kenny Pickens because they were desperate. They needed a quarterback. I still think that if Kenny Pickens had gone to Utah instead of Pitt, they may not have taken him, but maybe not.
Yeah.
But they're just not. They need to either luck into a Baker situation,
right,
or
steal a
they're going to have to hit on a draft pick that shouldn't, like a Russ Wilson who went what round did he go?
Third rounder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or obviously Brady that's an all timer. You can't expect that, but
right.
You need to hit on a second round pick because
Lamar Jackson wasn't a very high first rounder. I mean that's
you need to get a guy. The Steelers aren't bad enough to get a top 5 pick.
No,
top 3.
They never are.
No,
that's part of their problem.
Mike Tomlin's too good, and then
that's part of their problem. I mean, Mike Tomlin will walk up to guys like Myles Garrett and said, "Man, you're a hell of a player. I hope we never finish bad enough to pick you." Like I never want to be.
And they don't.
Yeah, you
never had a losing record, Rick.
Hey, man.
So I'm told.
I'm sorry, but you going to Canton with me when he goes in the Hall of Fame? Because that's where he's headed.
Is he? Okay, let's say
yes.
He quit. Let's say he coaches
today. He's done. He announces his retirement. First
he's
ballot.
A Hall of Famer.
First ballot.
First ballot Hall of Famer.
First ballot.
Wow. I'm not sure I agree.
And coaches are tough. Coaches are tough.
Dungy's had a better resume. No, I guess it's about the same resume, probably.
Well,
I think Dungy's is better.
I mean, Tony.
He's in.
Yeah, Tony's in. Now, if he hadn't won a Super Bowl, that would have been a different conversation, maybe.
But I mean, it's very similar to, although
Peyton
the difference
Manning,
is
right? Like, of course, Tomlin had Ben when he won, so.
And they both lost the Super Bowl, right?
They both lost, yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I think, and again, 9-8, whatever. winning records, and some of them were better than that. But that's a remarkable achievement of consistency that just doesn't happen in this league very often. And he does have at least one ring. He's been to a couple. Nothing of late, but yeah, I think he's revered enough in this league and has done enough that I think, just knowing the voters, I think that if they say Mike Tomlin, they'll put him in. I now look, it didn't.
I know we're probably running long on this pod, but let me ask you one more question.
We don't have a
Let's say the
time limit.
Steelers, say, you know what, this 9-8 is great, but
We're moving on.
we haven't won enough playoff games. I think they've won 3 since they won the Super Bowl, which is like coming up on like 13, 14, 15 years now.
Right.
So he gets let go. Is he, if you're a team, I'm not saying like a team on the verge, but let's say you're like trying to think of a middle of the road team.
You're the New York Giants.
Yeah, okay, good one. That's a good one, actually. The Giants, or if the Jets, before they hired you, if you're, say, the New York Giants, do you like, or say Vrabel hadn't taken the
Patriots job,
and the Patriots job came open, and you had a nice young quarterback in Drake May. Do you, would your preference be, let's go out and hire Mike Tomlin immediately, or would you say, let's find the next Kevin O'Connell? Let's look for.
Well, see, that's tough, because I think if you can find somebody that can bring that offense, and they have to have had work for Shanahan and or McVay, because McVay and Shanahan are the same guy essentially.
Right.
If you can find that guy like a Kevin O'Connell, then I think that's who you hire, because I think that's where the NFL is offensively. Mike doesn't call the offense, right? And in fact, I don't like Mike's hire as offensive coordinators, to be quite honest with you. I don't think he's done a good job there. So I'm not bringing in.
Got
Mike.
rid of a pretty good one
What's
upon
that?
a time. He got rid of a pretty good one once upon a time, right?
Yeah, he did.
And it worked out for the Bucs.
Yeah,
ultimately.
the guy named Bruce Arians. I'm not bringing in Mike Tomlin if I think I'm really close. I don't think Mike. To me, there are two types of coaches, right? There's the ones that bring a system, right? That bring a way of seeing the game offensively, usually. The McVays and the Shanahans and the O'Connells, those guys, right? They're special, right? They're just special. For a while, it looked like, that was the case with McDaniel in Miami. And then there's the culture changers. Tomlin is a culture changer.
So maybe a team like Dallas, he would be a good fit.
Good fit in Dallas. Like Dallas. if you want to change the culture, if you want to instill what winning looks like, feels like, what you have to do, the Jets, yeah. Like, to me, and that's just a bad organization. If I was any coach, I'd never go to the Jets. But yeah, to me, if you had a team that just needs a culture changer, that's what Mike to me is. Now, Mike had joined a great culture because they had been winning under Cowher for years and had a quarterback, but that's the key. At the end of the day, you can change the culture all you want to, but if you don't find that piece at quarterback, you don't have a chance. You just don't, like, and there's been some quarterbacks that have surprised me, like Goff and others that gone, and they still haven't gotten, to the Super Bowl, but they got close, but they've still played at a very, very high level. I think Dan Campbell is not an X's and O's guy whatsoever. What does he coach? He didn't coach. He was a tight end. He didn't coach offense or defense. He's a culture builder.
Right.
We're gonna bite kneecaps.
Special teams coach.
Yeah, Cowher, special teams coach, culture builder. So I think there's coaches that are culture builders, and then I think there's the geniuses, right? The ones that are just so damn smart that you're gonna have a tough time playing.
Who are you talking about, man?
I'll tell you what, man. By the way, have you seen John lately on X?
No.
Opening boxes? Have you seen this?
What's he doing?
Opening the box. Google John Gruden, because he's on X now. So John has this thing now where teams, it started with college teams, would send him gear, right? In a box. Hoodies, T-shirts, right?
Yeah.
Then it got to be shoes, multiple pairs of shoes. They all got hats. Then it was jerseys. Now the NFL teams are doing it. It's the greatest marketing thing in the world. If you've got a team that you just want to market, just send John a box. It goes to the FFCA. And the
How do we
funniest
get a
thing,
box? How do we get
well,
boxes?
we need to send a box. The funniest thing is, or people can send it to us.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I could go for some like more Penn
well, we
State
can
gear
open
or whatever.
boxes. We just need the video component of this podcast, and we're there, which is coming one day, believe me.
Nice.
So, so you send them a box, and it's the greatest marketing tool in the world because, like, are you kidding me, man? I got something from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Liam Cohen. How about Fred Taylor, man? How about Tony Baselli? They're only Hall of Famer. How about, I think back, and the whole time he's trying to open a box. Now, I don't know if you have trouble. I have trouble opening boxes sometimes.
Yeah.
But eventually it comes down to you grab the sharpest tool you can find, usually a knife,
And just start jabbing
and just start slicing stuff, right? Hoping that what's on the other side in that box is not going to get ruined. And so it's,
or you cut off a finger. Yeah.
the funny thing is watching John wrestle with the box, and then it's like a clown car. There's so much stuff in there. He's just cool. What is this right here? A helmet. You got to be kidding. The funniest one was he got, I think, a football autographed by Mike Perkins, which was Ray Perkins' son. Obviously, Mike does video to something with the Jaguars for years and years. And I didn't know this, but apparently Ray Perkins at some point in his career was with the Raiders. I had forgotten this. I didn't know it. I know he's with the Patriots.
As a player or a coach?
A coach, I think, because John was coaching the Raiders. I don't know if it had to be the first time. And it said, and so the ball was signed, you fired my dad, right? Mike Perkins or whatever. He goes, I fired his dad. I fired Ray Perkins when I was with the Raiders, man. This is funny. You fired my dad. Look at this. So he autographed it. So, but it's hilarious. You got, and he's gotten them from Indiana and all these schools and USF. And yeah, so I got to come up with a box, Sports Day Tampa Bay box.
And send it to him?
Well, if he'll open it, it'd be good for the podcast.
But what you need to do is send him the box, but then like have like triple like tape on it,
So it just can't be opened. That's the best part. The best part is watching him wrestle with the box, to be honest with you. John's great. So, but anyway, listen, Tom, I can't thank you enough. This has been fun, man.
Fun for me.
Easy talking with you as always. And they can read you on pointer.org. You usually are hanging out with some media stars, celebrities. Any black tie events coming up your way?
No, we got nothing at the moment, but we do have a special project going on.
Yeah,
that people should check out. Go to Pointer's website, and it's called the Pointer 50. It's an idea I came up with, and we're introducing it throughout the year. We're unveiling the 50 consequential people, moments, things of the past 50 years, because this is the 50th anniversary of the Pointer Institute.
Is it really?
Yeah. So,
well, that's interesting because it's also the 50th year of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Right.
You guys
and
were
50th
born
year
the
of
same
Saturday Night Live as
Saturday
well.
Night Live, all the
Good
great
Morning America,
institutions in America right there.
Yeah.
That's three.
So, yeah, we're unveiling this list. And so we're trying to pick famous moments over. It's almost like a 30 for 30 type thing that ESPN did, except it's for journalism. We've already unveiled a couple of the stories.
You've already ranked these 50 to 1?
They're not ranked. They're not like in any particular order, either in chronology, but they're just 50. In fact, we're still coming up with, it's still a working list. So if anybody has any ideas, send me an email. tjones@pointer.org.
How many do you have?
So probably about half.
Okay.
Probably about half. We're unveiling them throughout. What's that?
Okay. I didn't know if you already come up with the list or not.
No. Like we had a big meeting today, still talking about some of it. But like, for example, just to give you an example, the first one that we unveiled, which is a story I did, was CNN's coverage of Operation Desert Storm. If you remember that live coverage that night back in 1991.
Oh, it was incredible. Yeah.
That changed cable news. It changed how we looked at cable news. It became we realized that, oh man, what a powerful tool cable news is. Another one of the stories we just unveiled was TMZ breaking the news that Michael Jackson had died. All of a sudden, we started realizing that the immediacy of places like TMZ could break news.
That was good.
One of the other ones we're going to unveil is the release of the movie All the President's Men, which had a powerful impact on journalism. So those are the type of things that we actually had one. As the day we're recording this, we put out a video, which was the Darnella Frazier was the young woman that recorded the George Floyd
tape. Yeah.
killing on her cell phone,
Mm-hmm.
then that changed the way we look. Like everybody then now becomes almost like a citizen journalist because of
That's right.
cell phones. So these are the type of things that were, how things that have changed media um, over the past 50 years. So that's something
You mentioned the CNN in it was Baghdad or whatever they're invading
Yeah.
Iraq, I guess. I always thought it was
Baghdad,
interesting that you could be embedded as a journalist in real time on CNN as they're making an invasion, maybe the most highly classified effort going on in the military.
Yeah.
But we can't
And
watch
I don't know if you remember
practice.
that night.
We can't
like
watch
those,
practice in the NFL because we might see something, right?
You can't watch practice, but if you're Bernard Shaw, you could be in Baghdad while
bombs over Baghdad. But hey,
yeah, Wolf Blitzer coming from the Pentagon.
That's right.
Giving the latest information. You know what's the funny thing is, like Wolf Blitzer talked to me for the story.
Did he?
And he was saying that there were people in the Pentagon and in the White House who were watching CNN to get the latest information of
because
they
were broadcasting live as they're actually invading.
Yeah. And the world leaders around the world, including those in Iraq, were like
exactly
seeing what CNN
It's almost too much information at times, I
sometimes,
imagine. Yeah. That's great. Okay, so it's pointer.org. Tom Jones has his newsletter every week. Make sure you check him out there. Tommy, can't thank you enough, bud.
Thanks,
We'll talk
Rick.
to you again sometime.
Come back in one piece from Colorado now.
Yes, sir. That's the plan. We'll do. Man, always great catching up with TJ. It's just like old times. We went long on that one, Steve. That was a long kind of
You're getting more than your money's worth today.
Right? Like that. We should have broken that up into 3 parts. That was unbelievable. And thanks for your friend calling out, shouting out to my Terry Bradshaw imitation. That's one I really haven't worked on. But it was fun.
He wants a whole show done in Terry Bradshaw.
I don't know. Chuck just did. He didn't get. If I'd have had Bum Phillips, it was fun talking to him as I did for the book on Tom Moore. By the way, if you haven't bought the book, What's Your Problem? It's called The Player's Coach. I do.
You have a book?
I do. Tom Moore has a book. I wrote it with him. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's The Player's Coach, and it's available on all book stands wherever you do your shopping, as well as online. There's reviews out, by the way. Some of them pretty good, actually. So I was happy about that. But yeah, when I interviewed Terry for about, 25, 30 minutes one day, man, he's just such a great storyteller and a character. And it was fun talking to him. And that the way he talks just stuck in my mind, man. He's just hilarious. So anyway, we've got tomorrow, I think we're going to do a preview or a review, I should say, not a preview, but a review of the Bucs free agency. They've signed a lot of their own players, as Jason Light is wont to do, as well as adding some new weapons, obviously, Hassan Reddick and others. So we're going to go down sort of the list, tell you what their philosophy was. It's certainly different than we've seen in some of the free agencies past, not so much in that, I think they spend most of their time and money and attention keeping their own, which has been a successful sort of endeavor for them in free agency. It's always, I think, smart to reward your own guys before you go out there and take chances on others. But there are some interesting developments. So we'll get into free agency for the Bucs and what they've done this off season. It's not done yet. Probably some more signings to come. Maybe not as significant as a Hassan Reddick or somebody like that, but I think they're still adding all the time. So we'll talk about that as well as your mailbag questions. Get them to us. We're going to do mailbag this week. We will. You can do that on Twitter or X at NFL Stroud, at SportsDayTB, or my email address is rstroud@tampabay.com. Get on down to Breitling Boutique, folks. Believe me, this is a tremendous place to buy a great Swiss watch. One of the best ever. Breitling's been in business for 144 years, and they've got watches for men and women. Your wife, your girlfriend's going to love beautiful sports watches that they have there. The Navitimers, the Chronomats for the men, the NFL special edition, special collection, all 32 teams. Those team watches are going fast, but make sure you get down there, take a look around, and let them know that you heard about it on Sports Day Tampa Bay. That's Breitling Boutique, International Plaza Mall. Thanks for listening. For Steve Burstick, I'm Rick Stroud of the Tampa Bay Times. Have a great day, everybody.